This is Howard Bloom. He ran the most successful rock and roll and pop music PR firm in the 1970s and 80s. His client list was hundreds of names long and included the likes of
Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, Billy Joel, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, people like that.
Life was good for Howard until 1988 when he got sick.
Didn't have a name in those days, but is now called chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis. And it was serious. For 5 years, I was too weak to talk and too weak to have another person in the room with me.
Howard was bedridden until 2003, but one day he started to feel better, and every day after that he regained more and more strength until finally, after 15 years of being imprisoned in his bedroom, he returned to the world. And the first thing he did was he
went to a local cafe I'd been hearing about for years but had never been able to go to because I couldn't get out of my house. And I mentioned Prince and Michael Jackson because I wanted to see the reaction. I wanted to see whether anybody responded.
He wanted to know if his most famous clients had stood the test of time.
It was 15 years later. 15 years later. And everybody said, as if it were something that they have very seldom felt free to admit, yes, Michael Jackson and Prince have shaped my life. Some people were more shaped by Prince by Michael Jackson, and some people were more shaped by Michael Jackson than by Prince. But obviously, these two guys had been an imprinting point for all of these people, and those imprints were staying alive. They're alive today.
Howard said something that I don't want us to gloss over.
These two guys had been an imprinting point.
It's important to understand imprinting points because Howard built his career off of them.
You know, the human brain is very strange, and we're born with twice as many brain cells as we need. And the first job, once you emerge from the womb, is paring away the neurons that you won't need and focusing on the neurons that seem to help you in your current environment. One of the strange aspects of this is that we go through imprinting periods. Our brain looks for a certain kind of object. It fixates on that object once it finds it, and then it builds around the memory of that object for the rest of your life.
In other words, imprinting points are experiences you have growing up that become the subconscious building blocks of your identity, of your soul. And hearing the story of the formation of someone's soul is impactful. It can
jostle something inside of you. They produce feelings inside of you. They're powerful experiences.
So how did he find his artist's imprinting moments?
I did something very simple, and it's a very good idea for a journalist, whether the journalist is hunting down soul, as I was, or just trying to write a good story. And that is, I started at the beginning. I started with the question of what's your first memory of music? And then, if you were my client, I took you through the history of your life, one moment after the next. You want to give the fullest picture possible. And when it comes to certain critical things, like how they went from being a normal kid who dreams of being a star but doesn't have a shot, to climbing the step-by-step staircase that led them to actually being able to access stardom, that's a vital story for a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, or 15-year-old to read. It means that he or she no matter how ordinary his or her life, with persistence, could also reach that extraordinary level of stardom, assuming that he or she has the talent. And talent was something I left out of the equation always, because that's up to you to fill in. The one thing I can preach to you is perseverance.
If you were one of Howard's clients, he wasn't manufacturing a story for you. If you wanted that, if you wanted to create an image and be something you weren't, he would turn you down and happily refer you to one of his competitors. For Howard, it wasn't about building you into a brand, it was about
building you into an icon for the reasons you deserved to be an icon. For all the things you had overcome and all the things that you had achieved and those things that were at the core of your passions that you kept alive. One of the things that's primary to us is our aspirations, our sense of what we want to achieve in the future, which we often don't know. Too much of the time, we don't see any opportunities ahead of us. A role model helps you see a potential path.
Howard wasn't just building stars to be admired. He was turning musicians into icons, those who not only have adoration, but have influence and the ability to inspire the hearts and minds of their fan base. And he did that with imprinting points.
Because this story of how you would manage to achieve what you'd achieve while expressing the gods inside of you and staying authentic to them was something that a kid who hung your poster, who started getting sexual at the age of 12 and was going through one of the most profound life changes humans ever go through, and was looking for people whose posters to hang on his bedroom wall, that if he hung your poster on his bedroom wall, you would be worthy of being his role model for the next 40 years of his life.
This is the reason Michael Jackson and Prince were remembered all these years later. They had been role models for these adults at impressionable points in their childhood and are still a part of their subconscious makeup today. So that begs the question for you then, how do you find your own imprinting points? You can't.
All of my artists needed me. In other words, they needed an outsider to see this picture. They needed an outsider to say, it's important that you tell this story. Because, we all have our stories within us and they all become very ordinary. And we're all sure that they're so ordinary that nobody would want to hear them. And it takes an outsider to say, no, this is a chilling moment in your life.
Don't let that discourage you. Remember, Howard was trying to find his clients' imprinting moments so that they could share them in interviews, not so that they could make art in the first place. The takeaway here isn't that you have to find your imprinting points. The takeaway is you connect with others through your soul. The thing with soul is you can't force it. Your soul is in your subconscious. You have to create freely, and when you do,
it articulates itself. And it will articulate itself even if it doesn't tell you it's there. It will start influencing your actions even if you don't know it's there. My job is one of the great unknowns is not just out there in space or down at the bottom of the sea, it's inside of us. So my job is, as we are having this conversation, to see what's going on inside of me and what's going on inside of you to the very best of my ability. Because it's going on into those unknown spaces for which we have no words and articulating them for the first time. That's our job as culture makers. That's our job whether we're poets or painters or scientists.
The creative process is the act of taking your abstract thoughts and feelings and presenting them in a way that others can experience, taking things we have no words for and finding ways to articulate them. Art is a transaction of the soul. You are giving a piece of your soul to someone who will take it and make it a part of their own. But that doesn't happen if your art isn't made with soul. If you only make what your audience wants or only what the algorithm wants, you're doing your art a disservice. You need to respect the means of distribution, but you shouldn't only create for them. You, your life, your experiences, your perspectives should be present in everything that you make.
You just have to work from the heart. You just have to work from the deepest bowels of your self and soul and emotional self. You just have to let yourself be taken over by the gods inside. And because those gods are authentic, they will resonate with other people.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to listen to the entire uncut 90-minute interview and hear stories like how Howard once saved Michael Jackson's tour, you can find it at the link down below or at the Jacob Kelly interview series, wherever you get your podcasts.